A useless person who doesn't do housework or cook deserves a divorce. I'm going to demand $55,300 in damages.
Looking down at me, bedridden and sick, John suddenly declared that. Divorce? Just when he came home suddenly? What do you mean by useless for not doing any housework or cooking and demanding $55,300 in damages? Is he out of his mind? Despite the fact that the stress from John made me ill. I was boiling with rage at his outrageous treatment, but I couldn't move as I wanted, and couldn't even get up. I thought, I didn't want to let things go as John wished. With that, I forced a smile while lying down. Fine by me. John's face was filled with astonishment, not expecting me to agree to the divorce so easily. There's no turning back now. I'll make him regret all he's done to belittle me. My name is Emily. I work at an IT company called Lyrax, and I'm turning 38 this year. Though I mostly work from home, my days are incredibly busy yet fulfilling. It's often tough, but the work is rewarding too. My classmates from school are often amazed at how hard I work, but they respect me for it, which feels great. 2 years ago, I started a family. I married John, my husband. I met John 4 years ago at a pub in a bustling district, after dinner with a friend. After dinner, as we were walking to the station, someone called out from behind, "Excuse me." I turned around to see who it was. A man dressed in a shirt and jacket, looked like a capable businessman. He said, "You left this at the restaurant," and handed me my smartphone, which I had forgotten. Thank you so much for bringing it to me. No problem. I'm glad I made it in time. Would you like to grab a drink now? The man, relieved to have returned my phone, then surprisingly invited me for a drink. Shocked, I glanced at my friend, about to part ways at the station. My friend encouraged me to go with a smile. If you don't mind, then yes. That day, I had made a mistake at work, which was unusual for me, and had a lot to get off my chest. My friend had to meet someone, so it was perfect timing that he approached me. After parting with my friend, I went to a nearby bar with a man. That man is now my husband, John. At the bar, John and I vented about work and quickly hit it off. By the time we left, we felt as comfortable as best friends, and he asked for my contact. So we began to communicate, started dating, and married 2 years later. It was a surprisingly smooth progression, even surprising to myself. It was a late marriage, but lucky for me, who was always focused on work. That's what I thought at the time. Emily, could you get me a beer? While relaxing on the sofa messing with his phone, John asked me this, making me sigh again. How many times has it been? I've lost count. 2 years into our marriage, John's sloppiness was too much. John, who works at a well-known megabank, always boasts about being an elite banker, claiming that those who work are the most important. Before marriage, I had no idea he thought so highly of himself. I understood he was proud of his work, but hearing him constantly assert it was exhausting. Enough, I'm busy. Buy it yourself. As I was working, I couldn't run errands for John and brushed off his request. Then John scratched his head in annoyance and said, "How can you be busy with remote work? I was slaving away at the office all day and I'm exhausted." Remote work isn't always easy. Even when I said that, he retorted with sarcasm. Yeah, right, as if. You can take breaks anytime you want. I grew weary of arguing back, silently stood up from the chair and reluctantly went out to shop. Here's your beer, I bought it. John, without thanking me for running the errand or even paying for the beer, silently took it and immersed himself in his smartphone again. This felt less like a marriage and more like a master and slave relationship. I wondered why John even married me. Why did I marry John? I sighed to myself. Not to mention he never helps with the housework despite both of us working. I once suggested sharing household chores, to which he scoffed. Share housework? Huh, don't joke. You're always home, it's only natural for you to do it. But I do go to the office sometimes. I can't always do all the chores. You only go occasionally, right? Just hire a maid for those days. Huh. John was adamantly against doing any housework, never agreeing to it. He usually mocks me, saying, "You have it easy with your job," or "Hurry up with the chores." But at night, he would frequently demand physical intimacy. However, there was no sign of us having children. If there was a reason, it was probably on my side. I knew that it became harder for women to conceive in their late 30s. I thought if we don't have children, we should just enjoy our married life, but John seemed dissatisfied. He disdainfully said,
"You can't even have kids. You're really useless."
I was infuriated. He was of no help around the house himself. I doubted whether he was really so efficient at work. A truly capable person would manage their personal affairs well and easily handle housework. I had my doubts about John's work performance. Speaking of doubts, for several months, John's return home had been noticeably late. I didn't understand the busy periods at a bank, but when I mentioned, "You've been busy lately," he only replied,
"Unlike you, my work is tough."
When he continued to come home after midnight for months, even I, who was not quick to suspect, found it suspicious. It was only natural to suspect infidelity. One day, as usual, John came home late at night and collapsed at the entrance. Approaching to see what was wrong, he seemed very drunk and unable to stand, his eyes closed, nearly losing consciousness. I sighed and approached to untie his necktie when John mumbled something.
"Wait for me, Rose. Just a little longer, okay?"
I was startled to hear my husband whisper in a sweet, melting voice, "Rose? Who's that?" I couldn't tell if it was a drunken slip or sleep talk, but John started snoring and fell asleep as is. Growing suspicious, I installed many cameras throughout the house. Next week, I'll be away on a business trip for 2 days, leaving the house empty. If John is cheating, my absence would be the perfect opportunity for him to bring his lover home. While there's no certainty he'll bring someone home, if he does, I'll have evidence to confront him. With that thought, I installed the cameras. A week later, pretending nothing was amiss, I told John, "Well then, I'm off on my trip." He waved goodbye with a smile. He had a huge smile on his face, which infuriated me. Returning from the trip 2 days later, I immediately checked the camera footage. As expected, there was John with his lover, intimately engaged. Feeling nauseous, I couldn't watch the whole footage, but it was clear evidence of his infidelity. Clenching my fist as if to crush the camera, I was filled with rage. Unforgivable. The extent of his mockery was beyond belief. Does he think he can do this and get away with it? Confirming John's infidelity filled me with anger and sorrow. His constant berating like,
"The meal's awful,"
or
"The floor's dirty,"
only added to my stress. I pondered when to bring up divorce, but lost the right moment due to a sudden increase in work. Eventually juggling work and household chores, my body couldn't keep up. One day I suddenly collapsed with a high fever. I had to take the day off from work. Of course, I couldn't do any housework either. John knew I was sick from the morning, but left silently for work and returned around 6 in the evening. It was much earlier than usual. He then came to where I was bedridden. The smell of alcohol hit my nose, making me feel sick. Without a care for my condition, John glared.
"A useless person who doesn't do housework or cook deserves a divorce. I'm going to demand $55,300 in damages."
Looking down at me bedridden, John suddenly declared that. Divorce? He just came home and started saying this so suddenly? What does he mean by useless for not doing any housework or cooking? And $55,300 in damages? Is he insane? All because of the stress from him, I got sick. I was boiling with anger at his outrageous treatment, but unable to move as I wished, I couldn't even get up. I refused to let things go as John wished. With that resolve, I forced a smile while lying down. Fine by me. Surprised by my easy acceptance of divorce, astonishment spread across John's face. There was no turning back now. I was determined to make him regret what he had done. A few days later, when I fully recovered, the first thing I did was to get documents related to divorce agreement. After signing my part of the divorce agreement, I waited for John's return.
"I'm home."
That day, John returned around 10 p.m., reeking of alcohol. He also smelled of a perfume I had never noticed before. As usual, I confronted him with the divorce papers. I want a divorce. In a low voice, I said that, and John snatched the divorce papers with a
"Finally free."
Whether it was sarcasm towards me or himself, John smirked. He could have filed for divorce himself, if he wanted it so badly, but it seemed he wanted me to initiate it. I was fed up with his attitude.
I'll claim the damages. Haha.
Pathetic that John thought he could claim damages after cheating. I silently watched the divorce proceedings unfold without saying anything. The next day, I submitted the divorce agreement, successfully ending my life as John's slave. The end of our marriage felt anticlimactic, but just divorcing John wasn't enough for me to forgive him. I decided to take action to make John regret his own actions. Over a few days, I packed up all my belongings in the house. I decided to leave this house. This was a second-hand apartment we bought when we got married 2 years ago, but I wasn't too attached to it, so I easily chose to leave.
Don't ever come back here. Huh.
As I packed my things, John watched with a delightful laugh. He probably plans to live here with his lover once I'm gone. The whole idea is nauseating, but from the footage of the hidden camera, it seems John is quite infatuated with his lover. Ignoring John's words, I left the house with my suitcase. Phew, at least now I can escape John's verbal abuse. I sighed with relief. Then I headed straight to a real estate agency and asked for a rental property I could move into immediately. I found a somewhat small, reasonably priced, well-maintained apartment. I quickly signed the lease for the apartment. I'll move in a week, so I'll live in a hotel for a while, which should be fine. After that, I completed some banking procedures and checked into a hotel. I've been planning my revenge on John the whole time, and when I thought of my plan, I got goosebumps. Yes, this is it. There's no other way. Imagining John's shocked face made me almost burst into laughter. Just watch. He won't get away with this so easily. The next day, I immediately set my plan in motion. I felt satisfied after doing something so bold. Life then went on peacefully. Being single again was so much easier without having to cook or do laundry for John. I even regretted not divorcing him earlier. A month later, while enjoying my single life and focusing on work, I received a late-night call. Woken up by the ringtone, I checked the screen, and it was John. I initially ignored it, but he kept calling. I thought it would disrupt my sleep, so I reluctantly answered. Hello? I answered groggily, and I could hear cars and trains in the background on the other end. It seemed he was outside. Annoyed by being woken up and hearing the noise, I waited for John's response.
Emily, you finally answered. What's this about?
John's shouting rang in my ears, instantly waking me up. I knew what he was about to say, but pretended to be clueless, asking, "What are you talking about?"
Don't play dumb. I got a call from the bank yesterday. They suddenly fired me. I'm on my honeymoon in Italy, and this makes no sense.
Honeymoon, huh? Italy would mean a significant time difference. It must still be evening where John is. That's why he called at this hour. Typical of John to not consider my situation. That sounds serious. Good luck with that. Bye. I gave a typical response and was about to hang up, but John shouted,
Hey, wait!
So I sighed and stopped.
I asked why I was fired. Guess what they said? You lost us a major client. And guess which company? Lyrex Corporation, which is the company where you work at.
John explained how he got fired, but I had expected this. After all, I orchestrated everything. In the dim light, I closed my eyes and calmed myself. If I was to exact revenge on John for everything, now was the time. Taking a deep breath, I said, Yes, I know, because I was the one who withdrew our business dealings with your bank. Over the phone, John exclaimed in disbelief.
Huh?
Next to him, I could hear a woman's cooing voice asking, Are you still on the phone? I continued, unbothered. You might not have known, but I am the CEO of Lyrex Corporation.
The CEO?
Yes, I'm the CEO. John thought I was just a regular office worker doing remote work, but in reality, I'm the president who rarely needs to be on site. I left the company I joined as a new graduate after about 3 years and successfully started my own, which I've been running for over a decade. The company grew successfully, and we were able to receive substantial loans from banks. The bank where John worked was the one we had always been dealing with. After separating from John, I decided to repay all the loans we had taken from the bank. The sales representative was taken aback. They would lose the interest they were expecting to receive. The lump sum repayment was an unexpected turn for the bank.
Could you please reconsider?
The sales representative asked me hastily. I replied, I have one condition. Fire John. The salesperson was flustered and brought their supervisor. The supervisor, who I knew from before as they used to handle Lyrex Corporation's account, asked me what happened.
What suddenly brought this on?
I decided to tell the supervisor everything. Actually, your employee John was having an affair with the daughter of your bank's president. He ridiculed me, refused to pay alimony, and now he's about to remarry that young lady. I couldn't stand it. I learned about John's affair with the president's daughter through the footage from the hidden camera at home. The camera also picked up their conversations, so I knew everything they talked about. Both the salesman and the supervisor turned pale upon hearing my story, trying to maintain business dealings with my company. Probably the story reached the president, who got angry knowing his daughter was involved with a married man. They promised to fire John, so I decided against the lump sum repayment. That's why I still have dealings with John's bank. I knew about John's firing before he even called me. Huh? You're the one being unfair. You pushed all the housework onto me, ridiculed me, and even cheated. And now you're saying I'm the bad one? You can't even think logically. You called yourself an elite employee? Ridiculous. I will definitely demand damages from you. To think you believed you could get damages after cheating? And by the way, I changed the name on the mortgage for the house I was paying for. It's your responsibility now. I unleashed all the stress I had endured onto John over the phone.
What?
John was speechless at my straightforward truth. But then I heard a weaker voice than before.
Please, forgive me. Spare me the damages. And the mortgage too. Rose is pregnant. We can't imagine being in debt with a baby on the way. I've lost my job and don't know what to do. Please, let this slide. Please.
Hearing my pathetic ex-husband beg, I could only sigh. I couldn't believe I endured 2 years with such a man. Forgive? There's nothing to forgive. I want nothing to do with you ever again. The damages are a severance fee. This is all your fault, isn't it? Why should I have to endure any more? I'm done talking to you. You might as well keep running away in a foreign land. Goodbye. Ignoring John's plea to wait, I hung up the phone. He should be grateful I even answered at this late hour. With a sigh, I returned to bed. I probably won't talk to John again. The thought of leading a life unrelated to John brought a sense of relief. Later, my lawyer demanded alimony from John and his mistress after they returned from their overseas trip. John had apparently spent a fortune on the woman and was practically penniless. The mistress, a president's daughter, was scolded and disowned by her father due to this incident. Unable to access her family's wealth, John and his mistress were left with no choice but to go into debt. Even though John claimed to be an elite banker, I heard that he often skipped work, leading to poor sales performance. For his company, this incident served as a perfect reason to fire him. Now John and his mistress are barely getting by with part-time jobs. The woman being pregnant will soon be unable to work. I doubt John can support 3 people on his own. I think they should experience some hardship. Meanwhile, my business is thriving and I've expanded our operations. With a larger loan from the bank John used to work at, my salary has increased. I'm planning to buy my own house, fulfilling my longtime dream of owning a home. Although I lost a husband, I have supportive colleagues and business partners. I'm grateful for my fortunate circumstances and continue to dedicate myself to my work.
Oh, the broom has gotten stuck and is blocking the door. Please, can you get it for me? It's because of your bad behavior that things like this happen. It's your punishment for stealing our son from us. Reflect on your actions for a while. After saying this, the mother-in-law burst into laughter. I was shocked by her words. I was forced to clean a long and used sauna. And then I was locked inside it by my mother-in-law while the sauna was running. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law, ignoring my pleas for help, cheerfully left for a trip. However, the next day, I received a message from my mother-in-law. You're causing a lot of trouble. I wondered what had happened, but I still didn't feel like replying. I too had almost faced a terrible situation because of my in-laws. But this was just the beginning. My in-laws were about to face their own karma, which would make their trip insignificant in comparison. My name is Emma Irving. I'm a 39-year-old pregnant woman. I'm newly married to my husband Scott, who is a year older than me. We are currently living with his parents. I've been married before. I got married at 20, dropped out of college, and had a child. However, less than 3 years into the marriage, my former husband died in an accident. Since then, I've raised my son, Tom, as a single mother. Despite facing harsh judgments as a young single mother, Tom is now 18 years old. He started living alone this spring for college. And that's when I married Scott and began living with him and his parents. I started dating Scott about a year ago. At first, I couldn't accept his feelings and refused his advances. But Scott always understood my circumstances and supported me. Gradually, I was drawn to him. Finally, Tom told me to consider my own happiness, and I decided to date Scott. Scott had a good relationship with Tom, and I felt happy to have started a relationship with him. However, my in-laws didn't accept me. Last year, when we went to announce our engagement, they reacted incredulously. Scott always spoke calmly. I'm planning to marry her. Her son, Tom, will be a college student next fall, and then... What? Her son. What a disgraceful woman you've brought. Despite knowing about my past marriage, they ranted in front of me. I could only respond with a wry smile. I wondered if I was not allowed to dream of happiness again because of my past. But Scott defended me fiercely. I've already told you about her circumstances. It's extremely rude to speak like that now. She has raised her son alone. A disgrace? Who are you talking to like that? My in-laws were briefly speechless at Scott's words, but they quickly retorted. But, it's suspicious that she wants to marry now. It seems like she's after our inheritance. She got pregnant and dropped out of some unknown college. She must be after Scott because she's out of money. Exactly. You're being deceived. Indeed, Scott's family is wealthy. His grandfather, my father-in-law's father, was a doctor, and they have money. Both my in-laws and Scott are from elite backgrounds. However, I only learned about this after our marriage was decided. And I knew nothing about him except his name before he proposed. Deceived? I've been fond of her for a long time. How could she possibly deceive me? Scott tried desperately to make his parents understand. But they refused to listen. Even after our marriage was decided, they still saw me as a gold digger. And a poor, uneducated single mother, and spread these thoughts among relatives. Of course, my divorce history contributed to their perception. They just didn't like any woman getting close to their son. They've always been cold to Scott's girlfriends. And it seems that's why Scott had no marriage history. My previous girlfriends were not accepted by my parents. Scott is a wonderful person, but I wondered why he was single until 40. When I asked, he said that. I didn't understand the meaning of his words then, but I do now. Just the thought of having such in-laws would make anyone reluctant to marry. Just like others before me. I was aware that I had been subjected to sarcasm and was disliked even before we started dating. I knew they had disliked me even before our relationship. And hated me more because of my marriage history. Still, I was drawn to Scott's character, believing his parents would eventually understand. After marrying, we moved in together to take care of his elderly parents. Hoping to clear up any misconceptions about my intentions. After we started living together, I soon became pregnant. The due date is in January. My husband and I were thrilled, expecting a busy end of the year. My parents, who live far away, Tom, and even the parents of my late husband, were very happy about the new addition to the family and concerned for my health. I had despaired when my former husband died, and I've faced countless difficulties. But now, I have begun to grasp happiness again. Therefore, I had no doubt that my in-laws would be happy about the news of their first grandchild and shared the news of my pregnancy with them. However, even though it was their first grandchild, my in-laws' expressions remained stern when we told them. A child, huh? It's going to cost a lot of money. Dad, you don't have to worry about that. It's our child, so we will take care of it. But, you know, Emma already has a stepchild. Saying this, my mother-in-law glanced at me with a hint of mockery. It stung a bit, but I raised my voice. Tom's tuition and living expenses are covered by the money left by my former husband and the support from his parents. You don't need to worry. I don't intend to use Scott's money for that. I said this clearly. Scott had wanted to become Tom's father, but it was Tom who declined the offer. I'd like Scott to be more like a big brother to me. That's what Tom told Scott when we got married. Scott seemed to feel pushed away at first, but he was very happy with Tom's words. So, don't spend money on raising me. But I do want you to scold me if I'm wrong and maybe treat me to a meal sometimes. Scott responded, we are definitely a family, and if that's what Tom wants, I guess it's fine. I secretly shed tears at their interaction. Therefore, we won't be using Scott's money for Tom's education. It was a decision made by the three of us. But, you know, we usually go on trips with Dad during Christmas holidays. If you want to go on a trip, just go. We don't intend to bother you too. The decision about Tom is ours, so Mom, you don't need to worry unnecessarily. Besides, even if we did spend money on Tom, it's none of your business. My in-laws kept making excuses and were not openly happy. Scott, frustrated with the two, said this as if giving up. As expected, my mother-in-law flared up in anger. And none of my business? You are my child. What's wrong with being worried? I'd appreciate simple concern, but the way you say it sounds sarcastic. I thought you'd be happy, but I guess I was wrong to expect that. I was sad that the news of the pregnancy turned into an argument. Scott, sensing my mood, patted my shoulder as I looked down. Then, my mother-in-law spoke out in anger. My family is just Dad and Scott. I didn't want a child from a woman I don't even recognize. If it's Emma's child, I can't expect much intelligence anyway. I thought it was too cruel. No matter how much I tried to reach out, my mother-in-law never tried to understand me. Mom's right. Scott, wake up. It's not too late to get a divorce. My father-in-law seemed to share the same opinion as my mother-in-law. I bit my lip, looking down. Enough already. I was devastated, but Scott always stood by my side. That alone was a salvation. From that day on, Scott stopped talking to his parents. Or rather, he became angry and started ignoring them. Ever since you married Emma, Scott has changed. When Scott wasn't around, my in-laws started saying sarcastic things to me. Perhaps blaming me for the change. I'm sorry. If you're sorry, then just leave. My in-laws became more arrogant as I tried not to provoke them further. Their sarcasm intensified as my belly grew. What an ugly body. I'm worried about what kind of child will be born. It's a late pregnancy, anyway. If only you were a bit prettier, even if the child turns out unintelligent. I often heard their mocking laughter. I had hoped they would understand someday. But my mental state gradually destabilized during the pregnancy. Still, I couldn't discuss this with Scott. I knew it would only increase the harassment from my in-laws and didn't want to worry Scott more. You got pregnant on your own and now you're slacking off on housework. You definitely won't be able to handle childcare. She would come to me when I was lying down due to poor health and spit out sarcasm. So I had no choice but to push myself, which eventually led to a threatened preterm labor. Even though you've given birth before, it's practically like a first pregnancy now. You can't overdo it. The doctor said this in a dismayed tone. When I was advised to rest at home, I desperately asked to be hospitalized. The doctor looked puzzled, but when I explained that I couldn't rest because of my in-laws, his eyes widened. It's amazing that you've endured such a harsh environment until now. The doctor agreed to hospitalize me. It was a temporary solution, but I was relieved to be away from my in-laws. As I approached full term, I was temporarily discharged. The preterm labor was resolved, and the baby could be born anytime. I was anxious about returning home. But a little distance from my in-laws made me feel like I could manage again. When Scott drove me to home, my mother-in-law looked displeased to see me. "Oh, you're back?" "Yes. Sorry for the inconvenience during my absence." "Inconvenience? It's more of a nuisance having you here." "Mom." Scott scolded my mother-in-law, but she just snorted and walked away. She seemed to have no awareness that her behavior had led to my hospitalization. Father-in-law was probably the same. Scott didn't think his parents were the reason for my preterm labor. But he was fed up with their attitude and suggested we stop living together. For now, I'll be hospitalized again after giving birth, so I'll be away from them. The first priority is the birth. Then, Scott and I agreed to decide what to do afterward. One day, my mother-in-law approached me. "If you're just lazing around, could you clean the outdoor sauna while I'm away?" My in-laws were leaving today for a 5-night, 7-day trip. They were going to Sardinia in Italy, a place they bragged about as much as they could. As my father-in-law's friend lives there. Even though you're a daughter-in-law, you don't clean for Christmas or prepare for the holidays. You said you wouldn't be a bother, but you're not helpful at all. Can't you at least do that much? While preparing for their trip, my mother-in-law spoke arrogantly. There's a family sauna outside, installed as a hobby by my father-in-law, but now no one uses it. She wanted me to clean it. Indeed, I hadn't done anything during the busy year-end. Annoyed by her constant nagging, I reluctantly agreed to clean the small sauna. I put on sandals and went outside to the sauna. Upon entering, the musty air made me cough. It's supposed to be cleaned yearly, but it was surprisingly dusty. Just as I was about to leave, the sauna door suddenly shut. Assuming it was the wind, I tried to open it without much concern. However, the door wouldn't budge. What? It won't open. The door should open with a push, but something outside seemed to be blocking it. Even putting my weight on it, it wouldn't move. To make matters worse, the sauna started making ominous noises and began to operate. Realizing it would get hot, I panicked and started banging on the door. "Anyone? Mother? Are you there? What's all this noise about?" She peered through the small window. "I'm sorry, but something fell in front of the door and I can't open it. The sauna seems to have started too. Could you open it from the outside?" I pleaded desperately. Then, my mother-in-law said, "Oh. A broom has got stuck and is blocking the door. Please, remove it. It's because of your bad behavior that this is happening. It's your punishment for stealing our son. Reflect on your actions for a while." She laughed heartily at her own words. I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. "Wait, please. The sauna has also started. At least unplug the sauna." "Oh. Is that how you ask for favors? Besides, the power switch is inside, right? I have to leave now. I don't have time to deal with you anymore." She said this and walked away from the sauna. I shouted desperately, but seeing her cheerful retreating figure, I gave up hope. I searched for the power switch. I found it under a seat, but my relief was short-lived. The power button seemed broken, as the sauna's temperature wouldn't decrease even after pressing off. No. It's broken. The sauna hadn't been used for a long time. It probably hadn't been maintained either. Despite several attempts, the sauna's power didn't turn off. And I resigned myself to finding another way out. Somebody. Help. I tried pushing the door and shouting, and then I felt a presence. Peering through the small window, I saw my father-in-law. He seemed to have just left the house with his luggage for the trip. Father. Please help me. Open the door. I shouted at his figure. Noticing my voice, he looked over. He seemed startled to see me shouting from inside the sauna. But unfortunately, my mother-in-law emerged from the house at that moment. Scott will be back tonight, so let her reflect for a while. Oh, is that what this is about? I overheard their conversation from a distance. If it gets cold, turn on the power, and if it gets hot, turn it off. It'll be fine. Let's go. I shouted desperately again. The power switch is broken, and I can't turn off the sauna. Please let me out. My father-in-law sighed after a quick glance at me. Oh dear, lying now, are we? It's not a lie. Don't say another word. If you can't do anything, just stay quiet and reflect. I was stunned by his words. It seemed neither of them had any intention of letting me out. Indeed, Scott would be back by night, but in such a hot room, I might collapse before then. Moreover, I was pregnant. I must avoid collapsing at all costs. After they left, I pushed the door again. As I moved, something fell from my pocket. The noise drew my attention, and to my surprise, it was my phone. Panicked and having forgotten I had my phone, tears of relief came to my eyes. I hurriedly called Scott, but there was no connection. The message, "Please redial," had played, and as it ended, I felt desperate. Please, someone help me. Just then, a message notification chimed. It was from Tom. I quickly called him. Hey, Mom? Did you see my message? I'm coming to the house for Christmas. Tom. Help me. I cut off Tom's words and screamed. What's wrong? I'm locked in the house's sauna. Help me. Tom said he would come right away. Feeling relieved, I lost my strength and sat down. Tom, knowing that my in-laws would be away starting today, was actually on his way to visit me. A few minutes later, I was rescued from the sauna. What happened? Why were you in there? I explained the situation to Tom. He turned pale as he listened. No way, were you locked in there on purpose? As much as it is, I can't believe that. It must have been an accident with a broom becoming a makeshift lock. So, it was just a coincidence that the sauna was powered on using an extension cord? Tom said this, pointing to the cord leading out of the sauna. It was connected to an extension cord, which was plugged into a socket. I was horrified. The sauna had not been used for a long time. It seemed unlikely that it had been connected all this time. It felt more natural to think someone had deliberately locked me in and turned it on. If I hadn't arrived, it could have been really bad. Tom said this and hung his head in relief. About an hour had passed since I was locked in until I was rescued. The sauna was old and took time to heat up, which fortunately meant I got out before anything serious happened. I'm going to chase them down and give them a piece of my mind. Tom said this, but I stopped him. No, please. I don't even want to see their faces for a while. But I'm going to tell Scott everything about the harassment. I've been silent, but I can't take it anymore. That will be the best revenge on them. Tom reluctantly agreed to my words. Since the sauna was connected to the house's power, we could enter the house. As Tom and I went inside, Scott called back. Tom took the call on my behalf and told Scott everything about what his parents had done. "Scott is coming back right away," Tom said, hanging up the phone. I felt guilty that Scott was leaving work during such a busy period. But his words brought me great relief. "Emma, are you okay?" After a while, Scott rushed home at great speed. Apparently, he had taken a taxi and hurried back. "I'm fine. Do you need to go to the hospital?" "I'm so sorry I couldn't answer the phone." "Tom, thank you." Scott looked very upset. I felt even sorrier seeing him like that. I just happened to be here. I shudder to think what would have happened if I were delayed. I can't believe my parents would do such a thing. I really am. Both of you, don't be so down. "I'm okay." I forced a smile and tried to cheer them up. But I can't forgive them for this. It's one thing to do this to me, but they endangered our child's life. I agree. I've been too lenient because they're my parents. But I can't forgive what they did. They need to learn a hard lesson. Scott said this and suddenly took out his phone. He started making a call, then left the room. Tom and I watched him curiously. Is it a work call? He did leave work suddenly. But I'm worried about staying here tonight, is that okay? Of course. Tom and I smiled and talked. Thinking I should treat Tom to something delicious, I opened the fridge and freezer, which were packed with meat and magnificent crabs, possibly for Christmas preparations. Tom's eyes sparkled at the luxurious ingredients. Let's eat them before they come back. But just then, Scott returned from his call. He cut into our conversation with a bright voice. "Yeah, let's eat everything." "All right." Despite no blood relation, their smiles were identical, and I couldn't help but smile too. "Okay, let's have a steak." We were put in danger, but my in-laws were overseas. Eating steak shouldn't bring any bad karma. Resigned to this, I began preparing dinner, and we enjoyed a delicious meal together. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, I noticed several missed calls on my phone. They were from my mother-in-law. Ignoring them, thinking she had locked me up, I received a text message. Did you tell Scott anything?" I ignored that message too. Then, another message came through. "Because of you, something terrible has happened." I wondered what it could be, but still didn't feel like replying. I had nearly been in a terrible situation myself. As I set my phone down, Scott's voice reached me. Wondering what it was about, I went to where Scott was. He seemed to be on the phone with my father-in-law, who was audibly irritated. I could hear his yelling even from where I stood. "Just call the credit card company right now. Even if you call them now, that card won't work anymore." "Then what should we do?" "Are you going to abandon us?" "I don't know. Do whatever you want." My father-in-law was furious. Scott, however, casually laughed it off and hung up the phone. The phone kept ringing afterward. Tom, who had appeared next to me without my noticing, asked Scott, "What happened?" "I canceled the card yesterday. The one those two had was my family card." I was surprised. My in-laws were overseas. They were so angry because their card was not working. Well, I'm not going to let them off this easily, but for starters, they don't deserve to enjoy themselves. Let them struggle abroad. Tom laughed at this and said, "It's great that Scott is Mom's husband," giving him the highest compliment. After that, I kept receiving messages. Messages like, "It's your fault, Jinx, give back my kind son," like curses. I didn't reply, but I was frankly fed up. The curse-like emails from my mother-in-law continued every day during their trip. "I'm really sorry. How could I not have realized my mom was this crazy? Scott was more mentally drained by the curse emails than I was. Seeing both of us like this, Tom said, "I have an idea." Scott and I tilted our heads, but listened to him. Then, Tom asked to borrow my phone. Scott and Tom stepped outside for a few minutes, returning with a big laugh. They then contacted my mother-in-law from my phone. Due to Aunt's emails, Scott has gone crazy. I can't stop him anymore. Tom. They attached a video to the message. When played, the video started with Scott in the sauna. His face was visible through the small window. And the entrance was blocked with a broom, just like when I was locked in. It's hot. The power switch is broken. But this is a punishment. I'm taking the punishment for my parents bullying Emma. Scott's shouting voice came from the phone. Apparently, they went outside earlier to shoot this video. The 1-minute video featured Scott's dramatic acting, which left me astonished. Right after sending it, a call came to my phone. "Hello. You're Emma's son, right? What did you do to Scott?" "I don't know. Scott did this all by himself." Scott listened to the conversation, trying to suppress his laughter. "Let him out immediately. He won't come out. He says it's his fault." "Then at least unplug the power." She pleaded desperately, but Tom remained calm. "The power switch is inside, right? I heard you say that to my mom. It's been unused for so long, it must be broken by now. Scott is suffering. Why does he have to be punished? He doesn't need to." I was shocked to hear my mother-in-law admit she knew the power switch was broken. She knew, yet she didn't help me when I was locked in, which made me furious. "Mother. Emma? You're there too. Hurry and save Scott." "I don't know. Let Scott reflect until he's satisfied. He's suffered enough because of his parents." After saying that, I hung up the phone. Tom and Scott burst into laughter once the call ended. Their trip still had a few days left. Without a working card and worried about their son, they wouldn't enjoy their trip. Imagining them in such a state, I felt relieved. Then, on their return day, as expected, they burst into the house with incredible urgency. "Scott. Is Scott all right? Oh, welcome back." I greeted them nonchalantly. My in-laws glared at me with fierce expressions. "Where's Scott?" "Scott? Oh, he's still reflecting. He says it's all his fault." The moment they heard those words, my in-laws turned pale. Then, my father-in-law muttered apprehensively. "Doesn't it smell bad? That can't be." They hurried outside, pale as ghosts. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ugh. What is this? This is terrible. Presumably, they opened the sauna. Their shouts, along with a terrible stench, reached me. The smell was awful. I pinched my nose and went outside. "You. What is this?" While holding her nose, my mother-in-law pointed at the sauna. There lay the remnants of the crab and fine meat we had enjoyed eating. The ingredients she had prepared for Christmas. We enjoyed it very much. What a misleading thing to do. Where is Scott? Misleading? Did you think Scott had rotted away? It seems you were able to imagine what would happen if someone were locked in the sauna. My words silenced them both. Perhaps they were lost for words at my chilling statement. I nearly rotted away in there too. I never imagined you knew the power was broken and still locked me in. That. I'm sorry about that. She uttered words of apology for the first time. Probably just a pretense until she confirmed Scott was safe. Then Scott appeared at the door. "Scott. You're safe?" They looked as if I had taken him hostage. Relieved, they approached Scott, but he spoke to them without changing his expression. Safe? How can I say that? What? I heard their breath catch. How can I be safe when my beloved wife was treated so cruelly? That is, neither Emma nor I were safe. You might as well think we're already rotten. Clearly, Scott was declaring his estrangement from his parents. They collapsed to their knees. No matter how much I tried to reach out, we were not only unaccepted but also rejected. Finally, the end had come. Emma, let's go. Scott, who had apparently prepared in advance, left the house carrying a large suitcase. I'm sorry. I'll be kinder to Emma from now on. Scott, Emma, I'm truly sorry. As they apologized desperately, Scott reached out his hand to me, shaking off their grasp. I took his hand and we started walking. As we moved away from the house, my mother-in-law's wailing echoed through the neighborhood. We stayed in a hotel from that day, planning to look for a house. The next day, as we returned home to collect some necessities, there was a police car and a crowd in front of the house. What happened here? Scott asked a neighbor. Scott. Something smelled terrible since yesterday. So I called the police. What happened? I realized immediately. The large amount of organic waste in the sauna must have been left unattended with the door open. Peeking inside, I sighed deeply as I saw my in-laws pleading with the police. Get our son back from that woman. She kidnapped him. She's a real witch. Scott reluctantly went out and explained to the police officer. When the son who was supposedly kidnapped came to explain, the police could only give a wry smile. Scott, I was wrong. Please come back home. She clung to Scott, crying loudly. Ma'am. You were the one who treated your daughter-in-law badly, right? You reap what you sow. Instead of crying, you and your husband better clean up that garbage. You're causing a disturbance to your neighbors. I couldn't help but laugh as I heard the police's admonishing voice from outside. My in-laws had lost their beloved son due to their actions. They might not be financially troubled, but surely they would lead a lonely, loveless life from now on. And likely, they wouldn't have any special Christmas feast this year, but that was their own doing. Scott, Tom, and I moved into an apartment at the beginning of the year. We stayed in a hotel until then, which was very comfortable for me, especially being pregnant. As the new year arrived, my water broke and I was rushed to the hospital, where I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Despite the tough pregnancy, I was overjoyed she was born safely. Scott and Tom came to the hospital right away, happy about our new family member. Once we settled down, we planned to buy our own home. Scott secretly intended to make a room for Tom so he could come home anytime. I'm proud of my life, blessed with a wonderful husband and two kind, lovely children. A fool who can't speak isn't family. I'll leave her with you, old woman. Get out. What are you all doing? Pushing aside her son and daughter-in-law who were standing in the way. She hugged her granddaughter, who was holding her cheek in pain, and glared at them. The unrepentant son and daughter-in-law continued to verbally abuse their daughter who couldn't speak. Seeing this, I decided to raise my granddaughter myself and took her home. 10 years later, when we returned to the US from living abroad, my son and daughter-in-law appeared. I've missed you. We're family, right? Let's live together. Please go back, we're not family with fools. I am Dina Hill, a 60-year-old housewife. Having lost my husband a few years ago, I live alone in a spacious house. I considered living with my son Peter and his wife Olivia, but I decided against it. I just don't get along well with my own child and his wife. Besides, I might end up helping out at the pub they run. I can't move like I used to when I was young, and frankly, I'm not good at customer service. Living and working together would only stress us both out. So, I decided it was better not to live together. Even after my husband passed away and I started living alone, Peter never brought up the idea of living together. I was grateful for that. Freed from child rearing and caring for my husband, I thought to enjoy my time alone. But living alone turned out to be lonelier than I expected. Having spent my life doing housework, child rearing, and caregiving, I had no hobbies or friends. I spent my days watching reruns of TV dramas. Even when I tried to adopt new habits, they didn't last long. For me, living such a dull life, the presence of my 2 granddaughters was significant. Sarah, the elder, is 10, and Katie, the younger, is 6. Both are adorable girls. Sarah is a beauty and skilled at charming adults. On the other hand, Katie is a bit slow and quiet. She often feels lonely, being compared to her beautiful and charming sister. I love both of them, but I especially support Katie, because I can see she is disliked by her parents and sister. Every 2 months or so, my son and his wife bring the girls to visit me. "Grandma." Sarah would run up innocently. Her clothes are always new, and her long hair is cutely tied. On the other hand, Katie's clothes are worn hand-me-downs from Sarah. Her hair is unkempt and uncut. Katie, who loved to talk and used to chatter a lot when she learned to speak, has recently become quiet. Unlike the smiling Sarah, she now looks downcast and gloomy. After greeting Sarah, I crouched in front of Katie and spoke to her. "Welcome, Katie. Thank you for coming." "Yeah. I've prepared your favorite snacks today. Let's eat together." "Yeah." "Grandma, what about my snacks?" "Of course, I have them for you too. Let's go." As I held hands with my granddaughters, my son and daughter-in-law who had gotten out of the car called out to me, "Mom, long time no see. Here's a souvenir." "Oh, thank you. Have you both been well? Make yourselves comfortable." "Thank you, Mother." I let my son, his wife, and the grandchildren into the house, serving coffee and snacks. My son and his wife only talked to Sarah, ignoring Katie. Whenever I spoke to Katie, Sarah would interrupt, or Peter and Olivia would change the subject. I was concerned about their attitude towards Katie but decided it was best not to interfere too much. However, I would come to regret that decision. One day, having arranged to visit my son's family, I headed over with their favorite snacks. Just as I was about to ring the doorbell, I heard Peter's angry voice from inside. "Don't just stay silent, say something." Shocked, I touched the front door and it opened easily. Without hesitation, I took off my shoes and walked down the hall, realizing the voices were coming from upstairs. "It's your fault for not talking at school, making me embarrassed." As I ascended the stairs, the shouting continued, and then I heard a sharp slap. Opening the door to the room, I found Peter, Olivia, and Sarah scolding Katie, who was sitting Siza on the floor. Katie was holding her cheek, looking like she was about to cry, while Sarah waved her hand in pain. "Hey, Katie, your sister hit you, right? Wouldn't it hurt to say a word? A fool who can't speak isn't family. Take her, old woman, and get out." "What are you doing?" Pushing aside her son, daughter-in-law, and Sarah, she hugged Katie, who was sitting on the floor, and glared at them. The three were momentarily shocked, but then regained their composure. "Mom, what are you doing coming in like that? Ring the doorbell before entering." "That's right, Mother." "Isn't that rude? The ones being unreasonable are you. How can you surround and yell at a young child like that?" "Peter, you're a father, aren't you? Aren't you ashamed of mistreating your child? And Sarah, why did you hit your sister?" For the first time, I scolded Sarah loudly. She flinched for a moment and then looked down, mumbling, "But..." Olivia pulled Sarah close and hugged her, then glared at me saying, "Don't blame Sarah." I glared back, not backing down. Defending Sarah after she hit her sister was not the response of a proper mother. Watching this, Peter pointed at me and yelled, "Mom, what are you thinking? Stay away from that idiot. The idiots here are you." Apologize to Katie. Ha! As if I'd apologize. Peter, Olivia, and Sarah showed no remorse and continued to harshly criticize Katie. The girl in my arms was holding onto my clothes, her face empty. Had they always treated her like this? Without thinking, I picked up Katie and declared, "I will raise Katie. I can't leave her here." Leaving the astonished trio behind, I rushed out of the children's room. Peter, who had been standing there for a while, approached me smirking. "Mom, you're a lifesaver." I didn't know what to do with her anymore. As I stood there appalled at my son's words, Olivia appeared behind me. She was holding a small, worn-out carry bag and a backpack. "Here's Katie's stuff. Please take care of the rest." With that, Olivia roughly handed over the belongings. Katie and I looked up at my son and his wife speechlessly. They clearly seemed pleased that Katie was leaving the house. Disgusted, I left the house without saying anything. We returned home in silence, and I helped Katie take off her shoes at the entrance. Suddenly, she sniffled. Looking at Katie's face, I saw her biting her lip and tears streaming down. I hugged Katie and stroked her back, comforting her. "Katie, it's been tough for you, hasn't it? I'm sorry I couldn't help you sooner. It's going to be okay, now. From now on, Grandma is your ally, and I will protect you." From then on, Katie and I started living together. Having been hurt by her parents, she didn't speak. Even a simple good morning seemed impossible for her to say. According to her teachers, she couldn't talk to her classmates or teachers at school. Worried, I took her to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor diagnosed Katie with selective mutism. The doctor suspected that the strong stress from her parents and sister had caused her to feel extreme anxiety and fear, making it impossible for her to speak. Now that her environment had changed, she might gradually be able to speak over time. The doctor said, and I felt relieved. On the way home from the hospital, I bought Katie a cute notebook and a pen. "Okay, Katie. If you have something to tell me or anyone else, write it in this notebook or draw a picture. Then, slowly try to practice saying the written words out loud." As I said this, Katie immediately opened the notebook and began to write something. Watching silently, she showed me the page. It had the words, "Thank you, Grandma," and a drawing of my face. Katie opened her mouth, trying hard to speak, "Thank." But she couldn't finish, and sadly, she closed her mouth and looked down. "Good job, Katie. Keep it up, little by little. Well done, you get a gold star." As I patted her head, Katie looked up and showed a faint smile. She started using the notebook and pen to communicate at school. Seemingly gaining confidence, she gradually began to speak. And 2 years later, she could talk normally. Grandma, today at school." Katie would come home and excitedly tell me about her day at school. Seeing her so lively and well, I felt truly relieved. Then one day, I went to her school for a parent-teacher meeting. As I entered the classroom, a kind-looking teacher greeted me. Katie and I both said, "Hello, teacher," and sat down. As we talked about Katie's behavior at school and at home, she squirmed shyly. Katie's grades have been improving steadily since last year. "Take a look at this." The teacher showed me her report card. The graph had been steadily rising since she started living with me and was now shooting up. "I think it's because she's very studious. Recently, she's been buying difficult books and workbooks and studying every day. I said this while patting Katie's head. She had become very diligent in her studies since she started speaking. At home, she would study difficult books, and on test days, she would show me her perfect score answer sheets. I framed all her answer sheets and proudly displayed them. I see. In that case, why don't you have her take an IQ test at the hospital? An IQ test? The teacher responded, Katie might be gifted. She's possibly naturally talented. Katie's intelligence seemed to be beyond that of an adult. The teacher suggested that an IQ test would be suitable for providing her with an appropriate educational environment given her talents. I promptly took Katie to the hospital for an IQ test. As expected, she was gifted. I couldn't hide my surprise at discovering her incredible abilities. When I asked her, "How do you find your studies at elementary school?" she replied unenthusiastically, "Honestly, it's too easy and boring. I want to study something much more challenging. But if I tell my teacher, they seem troubled." Hearing this, I pondered. Can Katie receive the education she desires in the US? She probably wants to study at a middle or high school level. But could she, still in elementary school, study at that level? I consulted with my homeroom teacher about this. Then the teacher told me that in the UK, she could receive a good education. It might be possible for Katie to study what she wants if she goes to the UK. By the way, I remembered that my late husband's brother is working in the UK. I hadn't contacted him since he passed away, but he might be able to help. When I contacted him right away, he said he would support us living in the UK. Feeling relieved, I suggested to Katie that she study abroad in the UK. I want to go if I can be with Grandma. But I want to graduate from elementary school with my friends first. Okay, I understand. Grandma will prepare by the time you graduate. Katie smiled relievedly at my response. She created many memories in elementary school and graduated safely. We exchanged contact information, so she can stay in touch with her friends even overseas. I didn't tell my son and his wife about the study abroad. I thought if they knew their kicked-out daughter was gifted, they would come back to use her. Katie quickly adapted to life in the UK and studied in advanced classes. I supported her with all my might. Seeing Katie happy that studying is more fun than it was in the US made me truly glad we came to the UK. Her talent is incredible. A few years after studying in the UK, she entered University of Cambridge to study business. And then she started her own company. Katie is eager to repay her grandmother. But she has already repaid me enough. After all, she has grown up and become a fine adult. Her achievements were covered in the UK news, spread worldwide, and she became famous. Probably, her name is well known in the US too. I wonder what my son and his wife think of her success. I hope they regret the terrible things they did. 10 years after Katie started her company, we returned to the US for work. We rented a new apartment. One day, the doorbell rang. Thinking it was just the neighborhood circular, I opened the door without any caution. "Long time no see, Mom. Have you been well?" "Peter and Olivia. Why are you here?" I shuddered at the sight of the two of them. I had changed my contact information and lived far from the old house. So how did they find this place? Without paying attention to my surprise, Olivia called into the house. "Hey, Katie is here, right?" "Mom. We've come to see you after a long time. What do you want?" "Don't come near her. Don't be so cold, Mom. We are Katie's parents." "Yes, Mom. Katie is here, right? Please let us see her. Don't just enter like that." Before I could stop them, they pushed past me and entered the house. As I tried to hold them back, Katie appeared from the living room. "What's wrong, Grandma?" "What, Katie was surprised by the unexpected visitors. I turned my face away awkwardly. Meanwhile, my son and his wife seemed happy to finally see Katie. Katie, I wanted to see you. You've grown so much." Katie shook off Olivia's arms, trying to embrace her. "If you want to talk, let's do it in the living room. I'll prepare some coffee, so please wait on the sofa," Katie said coldly and started preparing coffee in the kitchen. My son and his wife sat on the sofa without reservation, telling her one-sidedly about their memories. Worried, I spoke to Katie, but she winked at me to leave it to her. When I sat facing them, they immediately brought up the main issue. The pub run by my son and his wife had closed due to poor management. My niece, Sarah, had become unreachable after getting a job. And now I have no idea where she is or what she's doing. Currently, my son and his wife are living in poverty, uncertain when their savings will run out. Hey, Katie, can you support us? You left home at 6, but until then, we raised you. Show us some filial piety. Katie, you must have been lonely without us. But from now on, let's live together. Let's make up for lost time and create family memories. I couldn't bear to watch my son and his wife begging Katie, feeling so pitiful and helpless. I don't understand how my own son turned out this way. Where did I go wrong in raising him? While blaming myself, Katie's voice brought me back to reality. I refuse. Fools are not family. My only family is my grandmother. Please leave. She had an unusually cold smile on her face, unlike any I had seen before. But, Katie. Wait, please. Despite their pleading to live together, Katie did not yield to my son and his wife. After forcefully ushering them out the door with tearful eyes, she locked it with a click. Through the window, I saw my son and his wife dejectedly walking away, shoulders slumped. Grandma. What is it? Shall we move out of here? She said this with a smile. As we talked, it turned out she had secretly been planning to build a house for us to live in together. It was designed to be barrier-free for my sake. Thank you, Katie. As I thanked her, Katie smiled shyly. A few months later, we moved into our new home. Thanks to the barrier-free design Katie thought of, I am living comfortably. The walls are adorned with memories of our past. There's also the sketchbook and pen we bought when we first started living together. Every time I see them, I am moved to tears. Today, I think I'll cook Katie's favorite meal and wait for her. With that thought, I began cooking in the kitchen. My name is Christina Baker, 40 years old. I've been married to my husband, Sean, who is 5 years older than me, for 5 years. After struggling to conceive, we were finally blessed with the child we had long awaited. Of course, I immediately shared the news with my husband, but his response was cold. Huh? A child? Why would you get pregnant now? What do you mean now? Aren't you happy? Happy? No way. Do you even realize how old you are? You're 40. When the child turns 20, you'll be a 60-year-old woman. Don't you think that's unfair to the child? Being pregnant at this age is embarrassing. Embarrassing? Such a way of speaking. You're not thinking of keeping it, are you? What do you mean by that? Exactly what I said. Being pregnant and giving birth at 40, 41, it's unimaginable. You must be so selfish to want a child at your age. If you're going to bring up age, you're in the same boat. It's not like a woman can have a child by herself. Men are different. Men can have children at any age. But it's different for women. Just so you know, I won't acknowledge it. Go take care of it at the hospital. Instead of being happy about my pregnancy, my husband coldly told me this and left. This attitude from my husband started a few months ago. Suddenly, he began attacking me for no apparent reason, and now his reaction to my pregnancy. Disturbed by my husband's behavior, I hired a private investigator to look into his actions. I knew it. The investigation revealed that my husband had been having an affair with a woman 15 years his junior at his workplace. Coinciding with the time his attitude towards me suddenly changed. What is this supposed to mean? You found out. Found out? You're not even sorry? Sorry? It's the truth. I won't make excuses. I had intended to divorce you anyway. And yet, you start with this troublesome talk of being pregnant. But this makes it easier. We're getting a divorce, right? Then let's submit the divorce paper and become strangers to each other. He casually admitted to the affair and demanded a divorce. Just so you know, I want nothing to do with the child in your belly. We're getting a divorce, so do whatever you want. But I won't pay child support. Hearing this, I realized he had no love for our child. Accepting his words, I decided to give birth alone without seeking child support. I demanded compensation and a fair division of property in the divorce. That was 3 years ago. I don't know much about how my ex-husband has been living since then. But I heard he's living nearby with his mistress. It was just another day. What should we eat? Which one shall we choose? I was at a local diner with my 2-year-old son, just the two of us. Then, the very thing I had feared happened. Is that Christina? I encountered my ex-husband and his mistress, whom I never wanted to see again. Despite everything, he cheerfully called out to me. It is Christina. What are you doing here? Is this your ex-wife? She looks as plain as you said. Who might you be? I'm having lunch with my son, so please don't bother us. That's my kid? Doesn't look like me at all. What an ugly face. What? Wow, I'm shocked. You can still have kids at 40? I thought only celebrities could have kids at 40. It's hard to tell if you're the mom or grandma. Looks like the kid might resent you in the future. What's with you? If you're just here to bother us, please leave. Come on, don't be like that. It's been 3 years since we last met. It wouldn't hurt to pay a little attention, right? Huh? Exactly. You can't be a mother if you get upset over something like this. What did you say? Actually, after that, I remarried her, and we have a son who's truly adorable, unlike yours. We left him with the grandparents today to go shopping. So, what are you trying to say? Just that I'm living happily now. I'm way happier now than when I was married to you. Sorry, it seems like I've stolen daddy from your son. But it can't be helped. It's your fault for not having anything to keep a husband. It would have been better if you were at least a wealthy single mother. Being a poor single-parent family must be tough. Unlike you, we both work at a major publishing company. We don't have to worry about money at all. Poor son, having a mother who got pregnant at 40 without thinking. You can't choose your parents, so it can't be helped. Having a goddess of poverty as a mother must be tough. As proof, as soon as I divorced you, the goddess of poverty, everything started going well for me. I remarried a younger wife, was blessed with a cute child, and even got promoted. Well, you and that brat can continue eating your poor meals. That's a bit too much. The diner was filled with laughter from the two of them mocking me and my son. The other customers frowned and looked our way, but the two of them didn't notice their stares. However, what I said next would put them in an unexpected situation. Poor meals? Are you referring to the food here at the diner? It's been a while since I've been to a diner. I was surprised to find that despite being low-priced, many dishes are quite authentic. There's no need to pretend here. Pretend? What are you talking about? I'm not pretending anything. What are you even saying? You probably can't afford anything but cheap food at home, right? Huh? We have a chef who cooks for us every day. I'm not really sure what you mean by cheap food. Huh? A chef? A single mother working for a small company. Kicked out with hardly a penny, and you're talking about having a chef? If you're going to lie, at least make it believable. Hardly a penny? Oh, right, you wouldn't know. Know what? You knew my grandpa owned some land, right? Oh, that worthless wasteland? Yes, that wasteland. What about it? That land, it turned out to be very valuable because of urban development plans. There was interest in building a commercial facility or something. Selling that land brought in a total asset of $3 million. Thanks to that, I'm living a happy life. What? In fact, I lost my parents early on and was raised by my maternal grandfather. But a few months before I decided to divorce, he fell ill and was hospitalized. That's when he told me this. I've decided to leave you the land I own in the countryside. I heard that land was bought by my grandparents. It's a wasteland now with no value, but I'm sure something good will happen soon. When that time comes, I want you to sell the land and live happily. All I want is for you to be happy. My grandfather, who lived in the countryside, owned quite a bit of land. It used to be used for fields, but now it's unused. He decided to leave that land to me. Such a thing. I didn't know. I haven't heard anything. Because I didn't say anything. There's no way you would know. Why didn't you tell me something so important? Why would I need to? That land wasn't something you inherited. It was passed down to me, his granddaughter, from my grandpa who had no one else. There's no need for you to know. But we were married, I had the right to know. I don't think you had any right. But you inherited it before we divorced, right? Then that $3 million should be mine too. What are you talking about? That's not how it works. Besides, the value increased after we divorced. Even if you had known about the land before we divorced, you would probably say something like this, right? Who would inherit such worthless land? What a fool. Isn't that right? That is. Then, the mistress who had been listening to the conversation started to speak. If it was inherited before the divorce, shouldn't it be part of the property division? Like how a house bought together would be. A friend of mine who got divorced said so. You knew this and kept it a secret, didn't you? All to monopolize the $3 million for yourself. So that's it. You're the worst kind of woman. Give us that $3 million now, even if it means hiring a lawyer. Ahaha. What? You're weird. What's so funny? It's just, realizing you really know nothing at all made me laugh. Sorry for laughing in such a sarcastic way. Feel free to call a lawyer or whatever. Since you seem unaware, let me educate you. Inheritances from parents or relatives are excluded from property division. This includes money, houses, land, real estate, securities, and more. So even if the land had increased in value before the divorce, it wouldn't be subject to division. There's absolutely no way you two could profit from this. In fact, I didn't know at first that inheritances from parents can't be divided as marital property. My grandfather taught me that. Even if you ever get divorced, that land won't be taken by him. So live happily without worry. At that time, I hadn't mentioned him to my grandfather at all. But it seems my grandfather saw through everything. Then, hey, don't joke around. What's this about $3 million? What's this about not being able to divide the property? This is a fraud. You've been deceiving me. Enough with this, you terrible woman. Thinking I was living in poverty when he found out I had a total asset of $3 million. He shouted in a red-faced rage. Hearing him yell, my son started crying as if a fire had been lit. Hey, stop yelling. You're bothering everyone around us, aren't you? What do you think this place is? Hearing the commotion, an employee finally intervened. Shut up. This has nothing to do with you. This is between me and her. He shouted and swung his hand as if to strike me. That's when. Hey, what are you doing to my wife? What do you mean, you have nothing to do with this? Then, my current husband, whom I married after divorcing him, entered. Seeing my husband's face, my ex turned pale with shock. Long time no see, Mr. Norman. Thank you for the interview before. Chef. My new husband is the chef of an Italian restaurant chain operating in several locations across the country. My ex, who had interviewed him years ago, when he was working as a journalist for a publishing company, was familiar with him. So, what exactly were you trying to do to my wife? Raising your hand, you weren't planning to hit her, were you? Wife? You mean? Yes, she is my wife. We were meeting here at the diner. How did this? After she divorced you, we happened to get married. You're the one, aren't you? The man who abandoned his pregnant wife to run off with his mistress. What? So why were you trying to raise your hand against your ex-wife here? That is? Let me guess. You heard about her grandfather's land and imagined her living in hardship. Only to find out she's worth $3 million, and now you're demanding a share? Sorry to tell you, but aren't you ashamed? Trying to assert dominance over your ex-wife and her husband upon a chance reunion. Turning red and demanding money once you found out she has some. I thought you were a serious and decent person when you conducted that interview. I never thought you'd be this embarrassing. Faced with my husband's questioning, my ex was scrutinized by the surrounding customers, who began to murmur with cold stares. What are you all looking at? This isn't a show. I'm done. I don't have time for this. You'll regret opposing me. Let's go. Hey, wait, just a minute. With those parting words, he hurriedly fled. After my ex-husband's threatening words, you'll regret this. I was curious about what he meant, but life went on without incident for a while. However, what? What does this mean? I received a message from a high school friend through social media, informing me of a shocking post. Big scoop. Famous Italian restaurant chain across the nation involved in food mislabeling? Most ingredients are expired. Serving rotten food. Some customers even rushed to the hospital due to illness. The post was accompanied by photos of rotten food, the source of which was unknown. Shockingly, the person who made the post was my ex-husband, Sean. How did I know? He had conveniently used his real name to make the post on his social media account. Furthermore, people began to agree with the post, saying, I've been to this restaurant, and the color of the food was off. Fortunately, I wasn't affected, and it's unforgivable to serve such food. Why would he do this? So, it's revenge for that time. Spreading baseless accusations. The danger of the internet is that even if the post's content isn't true, people might still believe it. The post made by my ex-husband quickly spread, and many people on social media started condemning my husband's restaurant. The impact reached the restaurant itself. We've been getting calls at the restaurant non-stop. I need to go check on the restaurant. Some people started coming directly to the restaurant to complain, and others made silent calls. My husband decided to consult a lawyer immediately. Upon requesting disclosure, it was confirmed that my ex-husband was behind the false accusations. Moreover, the person who agreed with the post turned out to be my ex-husband's current wife. Therefore, I decided to contact my ex-husband. What's the meaning of that post? Post? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. We already know that you and your wife are behind it. So, it's already out, huh? I told you you'd regret opposing me. I made you regret it. How does it feel? Got a taste of your own medicine? What are you saying? Because of you, my husband's restaurant is in trouble. Serves you right. You embarrassed me in public. Now it's your turn to be embarrassed. Oh, what's this? A complaint call from the ex-wife? Our post really hit it, huh? You should be thankful it was just on social media. With our connections to the publishing company, we could have gotten it into magazines. Such lies would never be published. Really? Shall we try? Our boss is pretty lenient. Maybe he doesn't know what we're up to? That's for sure. He might be napping right now, unaware of this whole fiasco. Napping? I doubt it. How would you know? Because your boss is right in front of me. Listening to every word, red-faced with anger. What? What do you mean? I've heard everything from the beginning to the end of your conversation. That voice. Boss. Why? How? I was contacted by her, informing me of the horrendous post made by our employees. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Even if the names on the social media matched, it could have been a coincidence. I trusted that our employees would never do such a thing. Boss. But when I was told it was indeed our own employees after a disclosure request, I was devastated. I immediately wanted to contact you both for a fact check. However, wait, boss. Before you called them here, I wanted them to tell you directly why they made that post. They wouldn't tell the truth in front of you otherwise. And I wanted you to hear their real intentions. After hearing her suggestion, we decided to make this call with me present. This can't be happening. So that's your true intention. No, that's not what. You posted lies just to make them regret? You think it's okay because it was on social media? Don't joke with me. I've heard everything about the incident at the diner. It's all your own doing. How dare you look down on your ex-wife upon reunion and talk about making them regret? That's just holding a grudge. But, boss, we were ridiculed in public. So what? Does that justify spreading baseless information on social media? Are you even a journalist? That is. But, boss, we were hurt too. We just wanted them to feel the same pain. That's all. Without an apology, the two kept making excuses. Losing patience, the boss said, "Both of you, come to the headquarters now. Let's have a detailed discussion face to face." And so, he summoned them to the headquarters. About 30 minutes after hanging up, they entered the boss's office with pale faces. Although slightly surprised to see my husband and me together, it seemed they had bigger concerns. What were you thinking? Posting outright lies on social media under your real names. Do you understand what you've done? I am terribly sorry. Your post spread rapidly, and even after being deleted, screenshots are still circulating. What are you doing as a couple? We didn't expect things to turn out this way. You didn't think it would come to this? That's impossible. I've listened to the phone call earlier. Acting out of spite like this, before being journalists, it's inexcusable as human beings. Because your profiles mentioned the company name. We're inundated with complaints and inquiries. Is this true? Release the journalist who posted it. Because of you two, we can't even carry out our regular operations. What are you going to do about this? I truly apologize. I will personally apologize to all employees. But this situation is partly their fault too. What? As you said, boss, we might have started it. We spread truths and untruths because we were upset by their comments. But for them to come to the headquarters like this, isn't it rather childish? Childish? Which one of you has the nerve to say that? Because of what you did, my husband's restaurant is suffering. You're the ones being completely childish. Then, my ex-husband, perhaps defiant in this situation, said, if mere posts caused complaints, maybe that's just the level of your restaurant. What did you just say? I haven't checked, but maybe you actually use spoiled food. After all, there's no smoke without fire, right? That's not true. We purchase our ingredients from trusted suppliers. I ensure that our staff. Who knows? When you're doing interviews, you can tell. Who's lying? Which are you, I wonder? Enough already. Listening to our exchange, the boss then said, why did you become journalists? Tell me, what is the job of a journalist? That is, journalists are supposed to convey the truth to the public. Making such posts without even researching, based on just a feeling, is unacceptable. It seems you two are not suited to be journalists at all. We cannot keep people like you in our company. Wait a minute, please. Are you planning to fire us? What we did might have been wrong, but it has nothing to do with our jobs, right? Why are we being fired together? Do you think I'm unaware of what you've been doing? What are you talking about? You've been secretly taking money and selling information, haven't you? What? I've received leaks about this just now from other employees. Even just this incident is a matter of credibility. What were you thinking? It's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Explain to me how it's a misunderstanding in a way that I and all the employees can understand. That is, it appears they had been selling information they caught hold of for personal gain. This was exposed by other employees amidst this commotion. Why would, who could have? Exactly, who would tell such a thing to the boss? What are you going to do with that information? Are you planning to expose the employee who leaked this? No, that's not. Then it doesn't matter who the leaker is, right? What's important is whether the leak is true. Whether you actually sold the information. Well, that's... Speak the truth. Yes, it's true. Hey. Actually, he got into gambling after we got married. And ended up in significant debt. Even though we both worked at a major publishing company, we couldn't make ends meet because of the debt repayment. Then someone offered us money for information, and that's how it happened. So, Sean had fallen into gambling and debt after the divorce. Struggling with their finances, they started selling information. I'm glad to hear it from you directly. I already had the evidence and knew what was going on, but I'm disappointed in you both. Boss, if we get fired now, we sincerely apologize. Please, anything but firing us. I'm sorry, but hearing your circumstances doesn't change my decision. You should be thankful it's just a termination. This can't be happening. Thus, the two were dismissed from their jobs due to misconduct. Employees who had not thought highly of them watched coldly as they packed their belongings and left. Honestly, after all his talk about me being poor, to think they were the ones without money and went as far as doing such things. It's just unbelievable. I feel embarrassed just thinking I was married to him for years. Well, maybe those two have learned their lesson from this incident. Learned their lesson? As if they would. If they were the type to learn, they wouldn't have done such a thing in the first place. A few days later. What do you mean by defamation? And what's this about damages? My husband had sued my ex-husband and his mistress for defamation and demanded compensation. After receiving the notice, my ex-husband contacted me. As expected, they hadn't learned their lesson at all. Ridiculous. Demanding money for something like that. And how do they expect us to pay such an amount? He ranted at me. Did you really think you wouldn't be sued for doing something like that? What were you thinking? What? You heard right. We have debts. What does that have to do with us? In addition to the debts from gambling, now there's the compensation to my husband. I imagine repayment will be difficult with a child to care for. But that's your own fault, so please deal with it. Deal with it, you say? Don't joke too much. We'll proceed through our lawyer from here. Hey, wait. Hold on. However, they inevitably ended up having to reluctantly pay the compensation to my husband, depleting their already meager savings. With their dismissal from work, arguments became frequent, and their shouting could be heard throughout the neighborhood. Then, an unbelievable truth came to light. You were cheating on me, weren't you? Who is he? What are you talking about? There's no way. On what basis are you saying this? The basis is this. Explain it. As their child grew, my ex-husband noticed the child didn't resemble him. Secretly, he had a DNA test done, which showed a 99.99% probability they were not related. Whose child is this? The test must be wrong. I don't know anything. There's no way you don't know. Their argument escalated. Apparently, she had been balancing my ex-husband and a colleague. And it turned out the child was with that other man. Eventually, I heard through the grapevine that they divorced a few months after that incident. Meanwhile, my husband's restaurant regained its reputation. And it's bustling with customers today. I'm sorry for causing you trouble. You have nothing to apologize for. Besides, some people became regulars out of curiosity after reading that article. In a way, we owe them for making our restaurant a topic of conversation. I never imagined this turn of events when I first discovered I was pregnant. But now I live happily surrounded by my kind husband and adorable son. "13 years ago, James threw a copy of the divorce papers at me and said, 'I've sold the house because I'm moving in with her.' At that time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. So, Cindy, the divorce is already settled. Take David and leave as soon as possible." His words have stayed with me ever since. I was surprised by what David said when he came back from a job interview at a company. I asked the HR interviewer, "Does your company condone affairs?" Suddenly, his face was filled with a smile like I had never seen before. The interviewer had apparently denied it. So, I asked, "That's strange. Then why are you here?" Indeed, the interviewer was my former husband, James Irving. "My name is Cindy Reed, and I am 48 years old. I work in a call center for an insurance company. My only family is my son, David. We were abandoned by my husband, James, 13 years ago. I met James when I was 20 years old. I had just graduated high school and started working as an office worker at a subsidiary of a pharmaceutical company. At 20, I met James Irving, who was 27 at the time and had been transferred to our office from the headquarters. For some reason, he took an interest in me and started inviting me to dinner. I had just become old enough to drink alcohol. There's no doubt I was thrilled to be asked out by an elite from the headquarters. After a few such occasions, we started dating, and I eventually became pregnant. I was shaken. I thought he would be angry and break up with me. But instead, James proposed marriage. When we went to tell my parents about our marriage, my father was still alive at that time and James told him, "I will make your daughter happy." Back then, marriages because of pregnancy were not seen in a very positive light. So our ceremony was very simple. Eventually, our son, David, was born. By that time, James had returned to working at the headquarters. And I moved the place with him, becoming a full-time housewife. I devoted myself to maintaining our home. When David started elementary school, we bought a house with the help of James's parents. I thought I was living a happy life. It was supposed to be, but I was turning a blind eye. As David grew older, James started coming home later and later. Married at the young age of 20, I didn't know what a typical married life was like. I never questioned why I didn't know James's colleagues or superiors. Looking back, there were plenty of signs that could have led to divorce. Then, on the day David turned 14, James left us after saying he had filed for divorce and sold the house. Suddenly, I was a single mother with a 14-year-old son, moving back to my childhood home without any prior notice. My brother and his wife were cold towards me. By this time, my father had passed away, and the house belonged to my brother and his wife. My mother, who was around 60 at that time, was diminished by my strong-willed sister-in-law and my blunt nieces. During this time, David and I were told, "You can stay for a bit, but find a job and leave as soon as you can." I couldn't immediately think of any job I could do. I was a high school graduate with office work experience but no special skills. Yet, we had to survive somehow. I scoured job listings, looking for work that could support me and my growing son. I was still lucky, though. David was 14, a difficult age, but he was sensible enough. It was better than being in the same situation with a baby carrying. I ended up working at a call center for an insurance company, where my office work experience came in handy. Initially, I was a contract employee, but I eventually became a permanent staff member. It was an unknown world at first, and I was exhausted both mentally and physically. But I learned things I didn't know at the time of my divorce. I was a high school graduate from a non-academic family. My ignorance was partly to blame for the financial difficulties I faced during the divorce. I should have demanded property division and child support from my husband. But I couldn't think of it. Neither did my mother or brother. Well, if my brother had cared even a little, he might have gotten some advice from someone. But he didn't. I realized my unjust treatment after joining the insurance company and learning new things. But by then, it was too late. That's why I wanted David to go as far as he wanted in his education. Wisdom and knowledge can save you. I didn't want him to end up like me. Now, 13 years later, our jobs, salaries, and lives have stabilized. David entered a prestigious national university in science. And he even went on to a doctoral program. As a mother, I was amazed. He even said he would manage the tuition fees himself. I wondered how he could manage his studies and finances. But he found a non-repayable scholarship and secured it for himself. All I did was sign the guardian section. David spent 4 years in college and 5 years in graduate school, demonstrating his competence and attracting scouts from various companies. This is exactly what they mean by "a black kite gives birth to a hawk." David's future is surely filled with light. However, amidst all this, memories of that day unexpectedly resurface, the day my former husband abandoned me. That memory still whirls darkly within me. It was truly sudden. James came home and, without warning, tossed a crumpled piece of paper at David and me. When I opened it, it was a copy of the divorce papers. I had no recollection of signing them. Yet, my name was written on it in handwriting eerily similar to mine. When I asked what he meant by this, James said, I've sold the house because I'm moving in with her. I couldn't understand what he was saying. The idea of divorce was completely out of the blue. So, Cindy, the divorce is already settled. You and David need to leave as soon as possible. He threatened that if we didn't leave within 3 days, he wouldn't be lenient. At that time, I was 35 years old. Having been a housewife for 14 years. I couldn't even begin to think of what to do next and simply headed to my parents' house. I still remember my husband's voice from that time. Maybe it would be best to forget it. After all, David and I are living relatively settled lives now. It's not that I'm holding on to the past. It's the frustration at my own helplessness and the resentment towards James that resurfaces. Knowing now that I could have done something. On a certain holiday, when I had finally decided to sleep in, enjoying a rare day off, my smartphone began to ring. The number on the screen was not registered, so I decided to ignore it and went back to bed. But the ringing continued, on and off. Eventually, I heard someone's voice from the voicemail. It was the former mother-in-law. She kept saying, "Please let your son speak to me." I wondered what she meant but decided not to answer directly. Later that evening, David returned home in a suit, which was unusual. When I told him about the call from earlier, he burst into laughter, saying, "So, she did call." David, with an expression I had never seen before, laughed so hard that he was shaking and even had tears in his eyes. "David, what did you do?" "I had a job interview today, remember?" "I told you." "Don't lie. Tell me the truth." "It's not a lie, but..." Then, David began to share what had happened that day. The interview was indeed real. And it was with a pharmaceutical company that had been scouting him for some time. The problem was with the company itself. The pharmaceutical company David mentioned was the one where I used to work as an office worker at its subsidiary. It's no coincidence," David nonchalantly said. "By the way, the HR manager who came for the interview was James Irving." "What did you say?" "The funny thing is, he didn't realize I was his son at all." "Did you know?" "Of course. Besides, I didn't even need this interview in the first place." "Is that so?" "Yes. After all, this company came scouting for me. There was no need for an interview or anything. But as the HR manager, he must have seen your resume, right?" "He must have. But my appearance has changed a lot since middle school, you know? The hairstyle, the vibe, everything." "Well, that's true. 13 years is a long time. Plus, I doubt he even remembered my face from back then." That made sense. I had been so focused on my own feelings that I hadn't considered how distant James had become from David. Besides, seeing my current address and academic background, he wouldn't have connected me as his son, even with the same name. That might be true. David had been an above-average student in middle school. But after the divorce and changing schools, he started studying unusually hard. His grades jumped to the top. He went to a high school that matched his performance, maintaining nearly the top spot in the science class, and then to a prestigious state university. With a recommendation from a professor in his 3rd year, David spent 5 years in graduate school, from master's to doctorate, achieving various accomplishments that were beyond my understanding. The scouts from companies were a result of his achievements, with several chemical and pharmaceutical companies interested in him. So, I was in a position to choose. He mentioned this casually. That's why I asked for the interview. I had researched and knew he was the HR manager. I was surprised by how much David had prepared. But he didn't change his expression at all when he saw me. The interview was standard, except David had the opportunity to ask more questions. So, I asked the HR interviewer, "Does your company condone affairs?" Suddenly, David's face was filled with a smile like I had never seen before. "So, what did the HR manager say to that?" He said, "Of course, that would not be ethically permissible. It's laughable, right?" That's why I continued, "That's strange. Then why are you here?" At that moment, the HR manager's face froze instantly. David couldn't stop laughing. Then, thankfully, the executive next to him asked me what I meant by my remark. That's when I pulled this out. He was holding a crumpled piece of paper. The copy of the divorce papers that James had thrown at me that day. I told them, "This is a copy of a document that my mother was deceived into submitting by this man long ago. What do you think about this? You've been keeping that copy all this time." I thought it had been thrown away. No, I definitely threw it away myself. I didn't want to see it. I thought I had to throw everything away and leave. Yeah, I picked it up after Mom threw it away. That's why it's all wrinkled. I've kept it in a clear file like this all along, thinking it should never be lost. Why? Because this is evidence of what he did to Mom and of forging an official document. And not just that. There's the crime of using a forged document, among other things. After all, that divorce document was invalid at the time. So him marrying another woman means he committed bigamy. Bigamy? I'm not an expert, so I asked a friend from law school about it. Whether this could constitute a crime. A crime. Yeah, it's a clear crime. So, right there, I said, "Isn't this the crime of forging an official document?" And I gave the executive a copy of the copy. That makes sense. Since the original copy is here, a copy of the copy. Because this copy itself has his fingerprints all over it. I wouldn't hand over the actual piece of evidence. Then what do you think he did? What did he do? He suddenly stood up and shouted, Are you treating your father as a criminal?" And then he pleaded with the executive. "Saying what I'm saying is a complete lie, a misunderstanding." What? I felt like laughing. What was that man talking about? But the executive was impressive. He seemed to understand what I was trying to say. He turned the questions towards him. "You know, there are power dynamics within a company?" He was probably eyeing the position of the next executive. The executive seemed to be assessing his character. He first kicked him out of the room and then said to me, "Did you request this interview not for employment, but for this purpose?" I did apologize. "I am very grateful for the scout offer from your company and find it an attractive enterprise. However, I wondered, what if this company, which keeps such an unethical person, is not for me?" David spoke so boldly. I was amazed he could say all that so casually during an interview. The executive was really decent. Regardless of whether I would join or not, he thanked me for informing him. He said he wondered why, after divorcing and then remarrying a while later, he chose another much younger woman. And he remembered Mom. Really? Yeah. "Mom, you said our wedding was small, right?" The executive was one of the few guests, as my father's boss at the time. So it was. But he said to others that he was the one cheated on but didn't ask for compensation to grant the divorce. However, the executive wondered why he didn't take me with him. The executive had been suspecting, from my photo and name, that it might be me. What? At that time, Mom didn't have the knowledge, and we were thrown out because of it. That's right, I'm so sorry. I would definitely fight with a lawyer now, but back then, It's okay. I know Mom was always a housewife and suddenly thrown out to work. And raise me was tough enough. Hey, Mom, I hardly remember him. He was always about work, if it even wasn't work. Indeed, James was hardly ever at home back then. Perhaps marrying me was a mistake for him in the first place. He rarely took me to his parents' house. It was only during the holidays, and even then, I was just made to help in the kitchen. And usually, it was all about work, passing each other by. He decided on the house, and suddenly we were living in it. When I started elementary school, I quickly realized our family was different from normal ones. That's why I acted out a bit in elementary school. What? Was that so? An early case of teenage rebellion. So, right after starting middle school, I sensed the presence of another woman from him. Did you say something to him? I didn't say anything because I thought it would make Mom sad. But I regret not speaking up when he threw the divorce papers at Mom and told us to leave. David's voice was strained. I had never heard such a tone from him before. Mom, I decided I needed a weapon that no one could take from me. A weapon? Something that would make me indispensable. With it, I thought I could one day confront what he did. David then said, I hate to say it, but I've used Mom's situation as a negative example. A negative example. Yes, that might be true. He was able to easily abandon Mom because neither you nor your family had the knowledge to fight back. Honestly, I'm also angry at my uncles. You're angry at your uncles, too? I won't bother with them. But even if I join a good company and succeed, I'll never have anything to do with them. Except for Grandma. Is that so? I felt a bit relieved.
Yeah.
Because Grandma was the only one who told me about what happened to Mom back then. And kept saying sorry and crying. When did she tell you that? After I entered university. My cousins started acting all friendly because I was a student at that university, which was creepy. What a surprise. To think that my nieces were doing such things. Hey, Mom, maybe we could take in Grandma? What? She's always felt sorry towards you. And it's painful to see her having to be cautious around her daughter-in-law and those kids. Thank you. After finishing our conversation, I mentioned something that had been on my mind. By the way, I've been getting calls from unknown numbers recently. David took my smartphone, saying, "Let me see." He recognized. Oh, this. It's his family's number. The executive gave it to me. David pressed the call button and put it on speaker mode, saying dismissively, "Hello? Hello? Is that David?" The voice that came from the other side was that of the former mother-in-law. I've heard from your father. You've made it to the doctoral program at that university and received company scouts. Haven't you? To think such a fine young man could come from that mother. Surely, it must be thanks to our blood. David whispered sarcastically in response. How about you become our adopted son? You'll be busy and need money, right? It's better than staying with that poor woman. And you're old enough for marriage, right? We can arrange a good match for you from our side. How about it? Good deal, right? Are you listening, David? Sorry for being such a woman. I spoke coldly into the smartphone. What? By any chance, did you hear that I was the one who cheated? So it's not true then. In that case, as David says, we won't hold back. I'll let him take over. Long time no see. I was surprised to hear from the company's executive that my mom was accused of cheating. So, you were involved too? No, we were deceived by James. Calling my mom such a woman means you were complicit in a crime, did you realize? What? It's a shame, but it's beyond the statute of limitations. However, your son committed bigamy by forging a divorce document and remarrying. It's embarrassing for me to have his blood. Of course, I want nothing to do with his parents in the future. Oh. But expect a visit from the lawyer my mom and I will be hiring. Don't you want the inheritance? When I die, it will all go to you. David snorted with laughter. Worry about the compensation you'll have to pay instead. After saying that, David ended the call. Did I go too far? I shook my head vigorously. At the same time, laughter welled up from the bottom of my heart. Right, if you've gone to all this trouble for me, I need to take action too. With a pat on my back, David cheered me on. Following that, I got a referral to a law firm through one of David's friends, and decided to pursue a claim for compensation. I learned about James's affair from him 13 years ago. However, I hadn't investigated who he married after that. I didn't want to think about it and didn't have the spare capacity. Upon reinvestigating, among the items included in the claim for compensation were the forgery of our divorce document by James. And on top of that, his submission of a marriage document with another woman, constituting the crimes of forgery of official documents and bigamy. Although it's too late to pursue criminal charges due to the statute of limitations, it served as a weapon in the compensation claim. I claimed compensation against James and his current wife. Additionally, I demanded 4 years of child support for David from James personally. Following that, my phone started ringing off the hook again. Me, a bigamist? Who filled your head with that nonsense? You've ruined me. Are you trying to destroy my wife and kids too? Come on, I gave you a good life for 14 years, didn't I? Don't think this will end here, and so on. So, I replied just once. Then, why not sell your current house? After that, I changed my phone number. As a result, James, hit by a double attack from David and me, ended up paying the compensation, was ousted from his HR manager position, and was demoted to the deputy manager of a distant factory. This was a story I heard from the executive after meeting him again. Apparently, the deputy manager position was nothing more than a nominal taskmaster, absolutely powerless against the actual factory manager. Even though the statute of limitations has passed, the revelation of multiple crimes dropped his character evaluation to the bottom. He was on the elite track within the company, but now it's over. The pharmaceutical company's factory is located far from the metropolitan area. James had to sell his condominium to pay my compensation, as that was the only way he could afford the amount we demanded. His wife and children had no choice but to follow him. It seems his wife had nowhere else to turn. She had been a full-time housewife since marrying him at 20, and that decision backfired. She wanted to stay in the metropolitan area with her children, but that was impossible. Her parents' home was as rural as the relocation site, and it seems she was disliked by her in-laws. But considering how they treated me, it's no surprise. They should have corrected their son, who married a 20-year-old twice, instead of trying to cut losses with their incompetent grandchildren. Thus, they tried to cozy up to David. Here's a capable grandchild. But David wasn't interested. By the way, I heard an interesting story. After settling the matter of the compensation, the lawyer shared this with me. You know, he's truly a city boy at heart. What does that mean? His new location requires a car. I clapped my hands in realization. He's over 50 and rushing to get a driver's license, and his wife, too. His wife, too? Absolutely. Without a car, they can't manage anything there, including taking the kids to school or grocery shopping. Plus, in such rural areas, you won't find work without a means of transport. I laughed at the thought. I already had a driver's license, thanks to my mother insisting I get one, even lending me the money for it. That was the right decision. Just hearing their story made me laugh. Let that proud former elite learn the hard lessons of obtaining a driver's license in his 50s. And the next spring, David joined a research institute at another company. Thrilled to finally focus solely on his research. The revenge was complete. Now, it was all about enjoying life, as David said, now my youth really begins. Of course, when he might find someone to marry was another question. Well, rushing into marriage isn't always good. My mother, who started living together with us, expresses her feelings deeply. Indeed. For David, who was not at all interested in girls. I hope he will find a suitable partner for himself in the future. As part of David's job placement, we rented a slightly larger room in between both of our workplaces and moved in together. For a while, we three want to spend our days that have finally come in peace.